The pen scratched against the paper like it weighed 1,000 pounds. I watched my daughter Diane sign her name on the last page of the divorce agreement, and I noticed her hand didn't shake. Not even a little. That told me everything I needed to know about how far she had come in 8 months. The attorney's office was on the 14th floor of a building on Peachtree Street in downtown Atlanta. It was a Saturday morning, 9:47 a.m., early March, and the city below was still waking up. The kind of quiet morning that makes you feel like the world is giving you permission to start over. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, I could see the skyline I had looked at for 40 years of my career. The same skyline that had watched me build a life, raise a daughter, and now, quietly, help dismantle a lie that had been living inside our family for 3 years. Marcus Elliott Beaumont didn't even show up to sign in person. He sent his attorney. That told me everything about the kind of man he had always been. Diane capped the pen, slid it across the mahogany table, and looked up at me with eyes that were tired but clear. Not broken. Clear. She gave me a small nod, the kind only a father can read, and I nodded back. No words needed. We had said everything that needed saying over the past 8 months. In kitchens and car rides and long Sunday afternoons on my back porch in Cascade Heights. As we walked out of that building together and the March air hit my face, I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel anger. I felt something that took me a few steps to identify, relief. But to understand why a 64-year-old retired attorney would spend 8 months quietly dismantling his son-in-law's carefully constructed world, you need to understand where it all started. Not in a lawyer's office, not with a private investigator's report, not with a bank statement or a hotel receipt. It started at my dining room table on a Sunday afternoon in July, with a plate of Margaret's honey-glazed salmon and a question from an 8-year-old girl who hadn't yet learned that some things are better left unsaid. Before I take you back to that Sunday, tell me in the comments, where are you watching from right now, and what time is it there? Drop it below, subscribe if you believe that children always tell the truth, and leave a like. Because this story is about to show you just how much they do. Let's go back. 8 months ago. My name is Thomas Gerald Hayes. I'm 64 years old, born and raised in Southwest Atlanta, the son of a Morehouse man and a schoolteacher from Birmingham. I spent 31 years as a corporate attorney at Hayes and Whitfield on Piedmont Avenue, a firm I built from a 2-room office with secondhand furniture and a belief that black men in this city deserved the same legal firepower as anyone else. I retired at 62 with a clean conscience, a healthy account at Truist Bank, and a house in Cascade Heights that my wife, Margaret, and I had lived in for 27 years. Margaret, she passed 4 years ago. Breast cancer, diagnosed in October, gone by the following April. She was 59 years old, and she never stopped being graceful about it. I still set 2 coffee cups out every morning out of habit. I don't think I'll ever stop. We had 1 child together, Diane Patricia Hayes Beaumont, 34 years old, a pediatric nurse practitioner at Emory University Hospital, the kind of woman who walks into a room and makes it quieter and warmer at the same time. She has her mother's eyes and my stubbornness, which is either a blessing or a curse depending on the day. Diane married Marcus Beaumont 6 years ago in a ceremony at Cascade United Methodist Church that cost $94,000 and felt worth every penny. 300 guests. A reception at the Fox Theater's private ballroom. Her Delta Sigma Theta sisters filled 2 entire rows. My Alpha Phi Alpha brothers were in the front. It was the kind of wedding that Margaret had planned in a notebook for 20 years. And watching my daughter walk down that aisle, watching her be happy, was the closest I had come to peace since losing my wife. Marcus Elliott Beaumont, 37 years old at the time of the wedding. Financial advisor at Meridian Wealth Partners in Buckhead. Tall, well-dressed, Spelman alumni events on his calendar. Alpha Kappa Alpha fraternity connections through his mother's side. He had the handshake of a man who knew how important first impressions were, and he used it on everyone he met. He used it on me too. I want to be honest with you. I liked Marcus in the beginning. He was polished and attentive, and he seemed to genuinely love Diane in those early years. They bought a house in Decatur, a 4-bedroom colonial on Pineview Drive, that they paid $687,000 for in 2021. They had one child, my granddaughter Maya Renee Beaumont, born in the spring of 2018. Currently the single greatest human being I have ever had the privilege of knowing. Maya at 8 years old was exactly what you'd expect from the daughter of a nurse and a financial advisor. Curious, observant, articulate in a way that made grown people stop mid-sentence and recalibrate. She had her mother's warmth and, apparently, her grandfather's eye for detail. She proved that on the third Sunday of July. Sunday dinners at my house in Cascade Heights were a tradition that Margaret started, and I refused to let die. Every third Sunday of the month, Diane and Marcus and Maya would come over for the afternoon. I'd smoke ribs or bake salmon. Margaret's sister Claudette would bring her sweet potato casserole, and we'd sit around the table the way black families have always sat around tables, loud and loving and full. That Sunday, I made honey-glazed salmon, roasted asparagus, cornbread from scratch, and a peach cobbler that I will not be modest about. It was excellent. The kind of meal that makes people quiet for a few minutes when they sit down, because they're too busy eating to talk. Marcus had arrived about 20 minutes late, which wasn't unusual. He was always wrapping something up, or just getting off a call. He kissed Diane on the cheek when he came in, ruffled Maya's hair, and shook my hand with that practiced grip. He seemed distracted. Not in the way someone is distracted when work is busy. In the way someone is distracted when they're managing something they don't want you to see. I noticed it. I filed it away. We were about 15 minutes into the meal. I remember, because the Braves game was on low in the background, and they'd just turned a double play, when Maya put down her fork, looked across the table at her father with that particular 8-year-old directness that bypasses every social filter adults spend decades building, and said, "Daddy, why does Mommy call that man honey when you're at work?" The table went still. I mean genuinely still. The kind of still where you can hear the ice shifting in the glasses. Claudette stopped mid-reach for the cornbread. I set my fork down slowly. Diane's face. I will never forget Diane's face in that moment. It went through 4 emotions in about 2 seconds. Surprise, confusion, fear, then a careful, practiced blankness that told me she was buying time. Marcus laughed. It was a short laugh, the kind designed to signal that the question was charming and harmless. "What are you talking about, baby girl?" he said. Maya was unbothered. She picked her fork back up. "The man who comes to our house sometimes when you're at work. Mommy calls him honey, like how you call Mommy honey sometimes. Is he like your cousin?" I looked at my daughter. Diane was looking at her plate. That was the moment. Right there. Not the moment I got angry. I've been a lawyer for 31 years, and I learned a long time ago that anger is just energy that hasn't found a direction yet. But it was the moment something shifted behind my eyes. A quiet, professional alertness that I hadn't felt since I was active on a case. The kind of focus that doesn't announce itself. Marcus redirected Maya with a question about her swim lessons. Claudette rescued the moment by asking about the peach cobbler recipe. Diane smiled and said something about Maya's imagination. The dinner moved on, but I watched Marcus for the rest of that meal the way I used to watch opposing counsel in a deposition. Every micro-expression, every glance toward his phone. The way he touched Diane's hand a little too deliberately after Maya's question, like a man remembering to perform a role. And I thought about something I had noticed 8 months earlier and chose not to examine too closely. In November of the previous year, I had stopped by Diane and Marcus's house on a Tuesday afternoon to drop off some documents related to Margaret's estate, some paperwork that Diane needed to sign for the family trust. Marcus was supposed to be at work. I had not called ahead. When I pulled up to the house on Pinneview Drive at 2:15 in the afternoon, there was a black Infiniti Q50 parked in the driveway that I didn't recognize. Diane answered the door in 30 seconds. She seemed startled, but recovered quickly. She told me it was a colleague from the hospital who had stopped by to pick up some training materials. I didn't ask to come in. I handed her the envelope and left. I had forgotten about it. Or rather, I had chosen to forget about it. Because sometimes, when you love your child, you look away from things that might mean she's in pain. You choose to believe the easier story. But that was before a little girl put down her fork at my Sunday dinner table and told the truth without knowing she was telling it. The Monday after that dinner, I called my former investigative contact, a man named Raymond Douglas. Ray had worked with my firm for 19 years, licensed private investigator, former Atlanta PD detective, one of the most methodical and discreet men I have ever known. He was 61, retired from active cases, living in Stone Mountain with his wife and 2 Labrador retrievers. But Ray owed me several favors that went back a long way, and more importantly, Ray understood that when I came to him with something, I had already thought about it carefully. I told him what Maya had said. I told him about the Infiniti in November. I told him about the distraction I'd been seeing in Marcus for the past several months, the lateness, the phone habits, the quality of his attention when he was in the room with his family. Ray listened without interrupting. When I finished, he said, "How long do you want me to watch?" 2 weeks, I said. Start with his work schedule. I want to know what Marcus Beaumont does on the days he says he's working. And if it's what you think it is, then I want documentation. Not suspicion. Documentation. And Diane? I paused. Not yet. Not until I know what we're dealing with. That was the hardest decision I made in this entire process. Choosing to investigate quietly rather than go to my daughter immediately. But I had spent 31 years watching people blow up their own cases by moving too fast on incomplete information. I had watched families torn apart by accusations that turned out to be misunderstandings. I wasn't going to do that to Diane. What I was going to do was make absolutely certain. Ray called me back on a Thursday, 9 days after I hired him. He said, "Thomas, I need you to sit down." I was already sitting. I was in my study in Cascade Heights, in the leather chair I'd had for 20 years, with a cup of coffee going cold on the side table. The light through the window was the long, low light of a July afternoon, the kind that makes everything look like it's about to be remembered. "Talk to me," I said. "His name is Deshaun Carter," Ray said. 31 years old, personal trainer. He operates out of a private studio on Claremont Road in Decatur. He drives a black Infiniti Q50 22 model, registered to a business called Elevate Fitness LLC, which was incorporated in Delaware in 2021. I didn't say anything. Ray kept going. He's been to the house on Pinneview Drive on at least 7 occasions in the past 4 months, on days when Marcus was out of town or working extended hours. I have photographs of his vehicle in the driveway. I have time-stamped footage of him entering and leaving the residence. The visits averaged between 90 minutes and 3 hours. I was quiet for a moment. Outside my window, a cardinal landed on Margaret's old bird feeder and then left. "Is this a friendship?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer. "Thomas," Ray's voice was careful. "I have photographs from a day when Marcus was at a conference in Charlotte. Deshaun Carter arrived at the house at 11:15 in the morning and left at 2:40 in the afternoon. Maya was at school. Diane's car was the only other vehicle in the driveway. I closed my eyes, not because I was surprised. I had suspected. That's why I called Ray in the first place. But suspecting something and having it confirmed are two very different experiences, and grief doesn't care how prepared you think you are. I thought about Margaret. I thought about what she would have said in this moment. I thought about the wedding at Cascade United Methodist, about the 300 guests and the Delta sisters in their finery, and my daughter's face when she came down that aisle. I thought about Maya at my Sunday table, holding her fork, asking her question with the complete guilelessness of a child who doesn't yet know that some questions break things open. I sat in that chair for a long time after I hung up with Ray. Then I opened my notebook and I started making a list. Over the next 6 weeks, I moved carefully. I am a man who has always believed that the most dangerous thing you can do in a conflict is show your hand before you're ready. Marcus didn't know that I knew. Diane didn't know that I knew. And I needed it to stay that way while I gathered everything I needed to give my daughter the clearest, most complete picture possible. What I was building wasn't a weapon. I want you to understand that. I wasn't constructing a case to humiliate Marcus or to destroy him publicly. I was constructing a record, a documented, organized, indisputable record, so that when I sat down with my daughter, she would not be able to dismiss it, and more importantly, she would not be able to second-guess herself later. Because I had watched enough marriages and to know that the hardest part isn't the discovery. The hardest part is the 6 months after, when doubt creeps back in and the person who betrayed you starts rewriting history. And the person who was betrayed starts wondering if they imagined it. I wasn't going to let that happen to my daughter. Ray continued surveillance for 4 more weeks and produced a file that included 23 photographs, 17 time-stamped GPS location records, and a log of 11 confirmed visits to the Pennview Drive residence. He also, and this was the detail that changed the dimension of what we were dealing with, discovered that Marcus Beaumont had opened a joint personal savings account at Wells Fargo with Deshaun Carter in February of the previous year. The account had a balance of $34,750. This was not a casual affair. This was a man who had built a parallel life. I am not going to tell you what I felt when Ray showed me that bank document. I'll just say that I understood in that moment exactly why people make impulsive decisions. I understood the impulse. I chose not to follow it. Instead, I called my former colleague Adrienne Whitfield, the Whitfield in Hayes and Whitfield, currently one of the most respected family law attorneys in Fulton County, and I asked her to recommend the best divorce attorney in Atlanta for a woman who was going to need someone who didn't flinch. She gave me a name. I made a call. I set up an appointment. And then I drove to Emory University Hospital on a Tuesday afternoon in early September. Waited in the parking structure until I saw Diane walking to her car after her shift, and I asked her if she wanted to get coffee. She looked at me the way she always does when she knows something serious is coming. She had her mother's radar for the weight of conversations. "Daddy," she said, "what's going on?" "Get in my car," I said. "I need to show you something." We sat in my car in that parking structure for 2 hours and 40 minutes. I did not tell her what to feel. I did not tell her what to do. I put Ray's file on the console between us. I walked her through every document and every photograph. And I let the evidence speak in the clear, unambiguous language that evidence speaks when it's been gathered properly. Diane didn't cry. Not right away. She went through the file the way she probably goes through a patient's chart, systematically, checking each item, going back to the ones that needed rereading. Her hands were steady. Her breathing was controlled. She asked me 2 questions during the entire presentation. How long has Ray been watching? And does Marcus know? 6 weeks, I said. And no. She was quiet for a very long time after she finished with the last page. Then she said, "Maya told you. Maya told everyone," I said. She just didn't know it. Diane put the file back together neatly, tapped the edges against the console to align the pages. Her mother's habit, I noticed, and held it in her lap. "I've known something was wrong," she said quietly, "for about a year. I didn't know what. I told myself it was work stress. I know. I didn't want to look. I know that too. She stared through the windshield at the concrete wall of the parking structure. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Somewhere down the row, a car alarm went off and then silenced itself. "What do I do now?" she asked. "That's up to you," I said, "but I've already spoken to an attorney. Her name is Patricia Monroe. She's on Peachtree Center Avenue. She's been practicing family law for 22 years, and she doesn't lose. If and when you're ready, I'll make the call." Diane nodded slowly. She looked at me, then really looked at me, and I saw on her face the particular exhaustion of a woman who has been carrying something alone for a long time and has just been given permission to put it down. "Thank you, Daddy," she said. "You don't thank me for this," I said. "This is just what fathers do." We sat there a little longer. Neither of us moved to leave. The parking structure lights buzzed. Outside, Atlanta kept going. Traffic on Clifton Road. A helicopter somewhere over the hospital. The ordinary sounds of a city that doesn't stop for private reckonings. I thought about Maya, about her sitting at my table with her fork in her hand, unbothered by the silence she had just created, already moving on to her next thought. Children live entirely in the present. They say what they see. They don't understand yet that sometimes what they see is the thing everyone else in the room has been carefully not looking at. She hadn't meant to start anything. She had just asked a question. But that question had been sitting in the air of our family for 3 years, waiting for someone innocent enough to say it out loud. What would you have done in Thomas's position? Told Diane immediately, or gathered the evidence first? Drop your answer in the comments. And if this story is speaking to you, please subscribe and leave a like. We're just getting started. Patricia Monroe's office didn't look like a place where marriages ended. It looked like a place where decisions were made. There's a difference, and I noticed it the moment Diane and I walked in on that Thursday morning in mid-September. The office was on the 19th floor of a building on Peachtree Center Avenue. Clean lines, dark walnut furniture, a wall of diplomas from Howard University School of Law in Georgia. State that she didn't arrange to impress you. She arranged them so you'd stop wondering if she was qualified and start paying attention to what she was saying. A credenza along the east wall held 3 framed photographs, one of Patricia at what appeared to be a Delta Sigma Theta National Convention, one of her shaking hands with a woman I recognized as a former Fulton County Superior Court judge, and one of a golden retriever on a beach that she never explained and I never asked about. Patricia Monroe was 53 years old, 5'4", natural hair cut close. Reading glasses she removed when she wanted you to know she was being serious. She wore a charcoal suit and spoke in the measured cadence of a woman who had learned that the calmer your voice, the more people listen. She shook Diane's hand first. "Then Mr. Hayes," she said. "Adrienne Whitfield speaks very highly of you." "Adrienne is kind," I said. "But she also doesn't say things she doesn't mean." Patricia almost smiled. "Sit down. Let's talk about what we're working with." What we were working with, as it turned out, was considerably more than infidelity. I had brought Ray's complete file. Patricia reviewed it in 22 minutes without a single unnecessary comment. When she finished, she removed her reading glasses, set them on the desk with a precise click, and looked at Diane. "The photographs and surveillance log are useful," she said. "But this," she tapped the bank document showing the joint Wells Fargo account, "is where your case becomes something more than a standard divorce proceeding." Diane leaned forward slightly. "More than. Your husband opened a joint account with another individual in February of last year. The current balance is $34,750. What I want to know, and what we're going to need to determine through discovery, is where that money came from. Because if any portion of those funds were transferred from marital assets, we're not just talking about infidelity. We're talking about dissipation of marital assets, which in the state of Georgia is a factor in equitable distribution. I had suspected this. I hadn't said it to Diane yet because I hadn't wanted to pile onto a woman who was still absorbing the first level of betrayal. But Patricia was right to put it on the table immediately. Diane was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "We have a joint investment account at Fidelity. We've had it since 2020. I haven't checked it in about 8 months." Patricia looked at me. I looked at Diane. "We need to check it," Patricia said. Diane pulled out her phone. Her Fidelity app loaded in 10 seconds. She tapped through to the joint investment account, and I watched her face as the number appeared on the screen. She turned the phone toward Patricia without a word. Patricia looked at it. "What was the balance the last time you checked?" "About $218,000, Diane said. "I remember, because we were talking about whether to rebalance toward bonds. The current balance was $141,340. In 8 months, $76,660 had left that account in a series of withdrawals and transfers that Diane had not initiated and had not been informed of. The transfers had been made by Marcus, who had equal access to the joint account in amounts ranging from $4,200 to $18,500, all carefully calibrated to stay below the thresholds that typically trigger automatic bank alerts. He had been meticulous. I'll give him that. A man who understood financial systems had used that understanding to quietly hollow out his own family savings while maintaining the appearance of stability. Diane sat very still in that chair for a long time. Patricia was already writing. The next 8 weeks were the most disciplined period of my life since the early years of building Hayes and Whitfield. And that is saying something. Because in those early years I was running on ambition, and ambition has its own energy. What I was running on now was something colder and more focused. Not anger. I've already told you how I feel about anger. What I was running on was a father's absolute clarity of purpose. We did not tip Marcus off. That was the cardinal rule. Diane went home to Pineview Drive every evening, made dinner, helped Maya with her homework, watched television with her husband on the couch. She told me it was the hardest acting she had ever done in her life. I told her it wasn't acting, it was strategy. There's a dignity in strategy that acting doesn't have. Patricia filed for full financial disclosure through the discovery process, which required Marcus's attorneys to produce 3 years of complete financial records. This is where having the right lawyer matters enormously. Patricia's team, 2 associates and a forensic accountant named Gerald Okafor, who had testified as an expert witness in Fulton County Courts 47 times, went through Marcus Beaumont's financial history the way my firm used to go through corporate contracts, line by line, looking for the thing that didn't fit. They found more than one thing. Gerald Okafor produced a 31-page report on a Tuesday morning in late October. I read the entire thing twice before Diane arrived at Patricia's office. Then I read the sections I'd flagged a 3rd time, because I wanted to be completely certain I understood what I was looking at before my daughter did. The highlights, as Gerald presented them, the $76,660 removed from the Fidelity joint account had been transferred in 11 separate transactions over 8 months. Of that amount, $42,000 had been deposited into the joint Wells Fargo account that Marcus shared with Deshaun Carter. The remaining $34,660 had been distributed across 2 additional accounts, one a sole proprietorship, LLC, that Marcus had registered in Delaware under the name Beaumont Capital Consulting. The other a personal savings account at a credit union in Stone Mountain that Diane had never known existed. In total, Marcus Beaumont had quietly moved $91,400 out of reachable marital assets over the course of approximately 14 months. He had also, and this was the detail that made Gerald Okafor pause before he said it out loud, taken a $55,000 personal loan against the equity in the Pinneview Drive house in January of that year. The loan had been obtained using a forged co-applicant signature. Diane's name was on the loan documents. Her signature was not her signature. Patricia set her pen down when Gerald said that. "That's not dissipation of marital assets anymore," she said. "That's mortgage fraud." Gerald nodded. "I've already prepared a summary suitable for referral to the Fulton County District Attorney's Office." I looked at Diane. She was looking at the table. Her jaw was set in the particular way that meant she was holding something enormous at a controlled distance, because if she let it get close, she wouldn't be able to function, and she needed to function. I reached across and put my hand over hers. She didn't look up, but she turned her hand over and held mine. Here is what nobody tells you about the practical work of ending a marriage. The paperwork is almost merciful, because it gives you something concrete to do. Every document, every disclosure, every deposition date on the calendar is a small, manageable task in a situation that otherwise has no edges. Diane threw herself into that work with the same clinical focus she brought to her patients, and I believe it kept her sane. Maya knew something was happening. Children always know. She didn't know what, but she had started watching the adults in her world with an attention that broke my heart a little. That careful, radar-like watching that children do when they understand that the ground beneath them is shifting and they haven't been told why. Every third Sunday, I still had Diane and Maya for dinner. Marcus stopped coming after the third week. He claimed work obligations, which we all understood to mean that the atmosphere in that house had become too heavy for a man with a guilty conscience to sit in comfortably. Maya and I played dominoes after dinner. She beat me twice in 3 games. She is her mother's daughter in that too. One Sunday evening in November, after Diane had taken a phone call in the kitchen, and Maya and I were sitting on the back porch watching the last of the light fade over the backyard, Maya looked up at me with that level, serious gaze she has and said, "Granddad, is Mommy and Daddy gonna be okay?" I thought for a moment about what to say. I am not a man who believes in lying to children, but I also know that the truth has to be shaped for the person receiving it. "Your mommy is going to be more than okay," I said. "She's one of the strongest people I know." "You know where she gets that from?" Maya thought about it. "You?" "From your grandmother, Margaret," I said. "And she put some of it in your mommy, and your mommy put some of it in you. So you're going to be okay too." Maya considered this with the seriousness it deserved. Then she went back to her juice. I sat there on that porch in the November dark, thinking about the chain of things, how Margaret's strength had moved through Diane and into this little girl, how that same little girl had sat at my table 4 months ago and said the truest thing anyone in our family had said in years, without knowing she was saying it, without any agenda other than genuine 8-year-old curiosity. I thought about what Ray had told me when I first called him. He'd said, "How do you want to handle this?" And I had said, "Carefully." But what I had meant was, with the same respect for the truth that my wife had for it, that my daughter has for it, that this child sitting next to me drinking juice on a November evening already has. Instinctively, because some things get passed down whether you intend them to or not. The deposition of Marcus Elliott Beaumont took place on a Wednesday morning in December, in a conference room on the 11th floor of Patricia Monroe's building. I was not present. Patricia had advised against it, and she was right. My presence would have introduced an emotional variable into what needed to be a clean, technical proceeding. I sat in a coffee shop on Peachtree Center Avenue called Rostam's, ordered a dark roast and a piece of cornbread that wasn't as good as mine, and waited for Patricia's text. From what Diane told me afterward, and from the deposition transcript I read in full that Friday, Marcus arrived with his attorney, a man named Craig Hollister, who had a reputation for delay tactics and procedural challenges. Hollister was good. Patricia was better. The deposition lasted 4 hours and 11 minutes. Patricia walked Marcus through his financial records the way I used to walk hostile witnesses through their own contradictions, not confrontationally, but with the quiet, relentless precision of someone who knows exactly where every answer leads before the question is asked. She asked about the Delaware LLC. She asked about the credit union account. She asked about the 11 Fidelity transfers. She asked about the joint Wells Fargo account with Deshaun Carter. Marcus answered some questions. He declined to answer others on Fifth Amendment grounds, which Craig Hollister had clearly advised him to do in anticipation of the fraud referral. The moment that Diane described to me afterward, the moment she said she would never forget, came near the end of the deposition, when Patricia placed a single document on the table in front of Marcus. It was the mortgage loan application from January, the page with Diane's signature. Patricia looked at Marcus Beaumont and said, "Is this your wife's signature?" Marcus looked at the document. He looked at Craig Hollister. Craig Hollister's face, according to Diane, did not move. Marcus said, "I'd like to take a brief recess." Patricia said, "Of course." She texted me 20 seconds later. The text said, "He just looked at the signature page. It's over." I set down my cornbread. I looked out the window at Peachtree Center Avenue, at the lunch crowd moving along the sidewalk, at the ordinary machinery of a city going about its Wednesday. I thought about a Sunday afternoon in July, honey-glazed salmon, a Braves game on low, and a little girl who hadn't learned yet to keep quiet about the things she saw. I said a quiet thank you to my wife, wherever she was. Then I put my jacket on and went back to work. The referral to the Fulton County District Attorney's Office was filed by Patricia Monroe's firm on December 19th. The charge was mortgage fraud, specifically the forging of a co-applicant's signature on a home equity loan instrument, which under Georgia Code Section 1691 is a felony. Marcus Beaumont was formally charged on January 8th. He was processed, bonded out by his mother for $25,000, and placed on a court monitoring program pending trial. His firm, Meridian Wealth Partners in Buckhead, placed him on administrative leave the same day the charges were filed. By January 15th, the leave had become termination. The divorce settlement was reached through mediation on February 14th, Valentine's Day, which I am certain Patricia chose with some awareness of the symmetry. Marcus received none of the Fidelity investment account, from which the $76,660 in unauthorized transfers had already been forensically documented and assigned to his debt column. He received none of the equity in the Pennview Drive house, which Diane was awarded outright, along with primary physical custody of Maya. Child support was set at $3,400 per month, enforced through a wage garnishment mechanism that would follow him regardless of where he worked next. The $91,400 in identified marital asset dissipation was entered as a judgment against Marcus, to be repaid to Diane over 5 years. Deshaun Carter was not charged with anything. He had not known about the forged signature. He had not known about the transferred funds. He was, according to everything Ray could determine, simply a man who had been foolish enough to believe that Marcus Beaumont's promises had any foundation beneath them. I held no particular feeling toward Deshaun Carter. He even used the same way financial marks are used. Someone had made him feel special while simultaneously treating him as a tool. That is its own kind of damage, and it was not mine to address. On the last Saturday of February, at 9:47 in the morning, in Patricia Monroe's conference room on the 14th floor of a building on Peachtree Street, Diane Patricia Hayes Beaumont picked up a pen and signed the final documents that returned her last name to Hayes. She signed with a steady hand. Marcus's attorney accepted the documents on his behalf, shook Patricia's hand with the professional neutrality of a man doing his job, and left without ceremony. Diane and I walked out into the March morning air together. She looped her arm through mine the way she used to when she was small. When I'd take her to Cascade Road for ice cream on Saturday afternoons, when the world was simpler and everything she needed was within reach of my two hands. We walked half a block before either of us spoke. "Daddy," she said, "I need to tell you something." "Tell me." She stopped walking. She looked at me directly, the way her mother used to when she had something real to say. "I was angry at you for a while, after the parking garage. Not at you, not really. But I needed somewhere to put it, and you were the safest place." "I know," I said. "I was angry that it was real," she said. "I was angry that you had proof. Because as long as I only suspected, I could still choose not to know. And you took that choice away from me." She paused. "I'm grateful for that." "I'm grateful you took it away." I didn't say anything. I put my arm around her, and we stood on Peachtree Street for a moment, Atlanta moving around us in all directions, the sun coming through the buildings at a low winter angle that made everything look gold. "You know what I kept thinking about?" she said, through all of it. "I kept thinking about Maya at your table, the way she just said it, like it was nothing. Because for her, it was nothing," I said. "She was just asking a question. She saved me," Diane said quietly. "My 8-year-old saved me." I thought about that for a moment. About a child's unfiltered honesty moving through a family like a current, touching every person, rearranging every assumption, illuminating every corner that had been carefully kept in shadow. "She didn't save you," I said. "She just turned the light on. You did the rest." Diane leaned her head against my shoulder. We started walking again. Maya started 2nd grade that fall at Woodward Academy. She made 3 new friends in the first week, which surprised no one who knows her. On the first Sunday after school started, she came to my house for dinner and ate 2 pieces of my honey-glazed salmon and told me in complete seriousness that it needed more lemon. I told her she was right. I would adjust the recipe. She nodded, satisfied, and went back to her dominoes. Diane is back at Emory, working 4 days a week. Recently accepted a position as lead practitioner for a new pediatric outreach program in South Atlanta. She started attending Cascade United Methodist again on Sunday mornings. Not every week, but enough. She laughs more easily now. Not the kind of laugh that covers something, but the kind that comes from a person who has looked at the worst thing and found out they were stronger. Marcus Beaumont's fraud case is proceeding through the Fulton County court system. His preliminary hearing is scheduled for April. I won't speculate on the outcome, but I will say that Gerald O'Coffer's 31-page forensic report is an exceptionally thorough piece of documentation, and Fulton County prosecutors are known for using exceptionally thorough documentation. Ray Douglas sent me a bottle of Blanton's bourbon in December with a card that said, "Handled correctly, MRD." Those 3 letters, methodical, respectful, decisive, are the highest compliment Ray gives anyone. I put the bottle on the shelf in my study next to a photograph of Margaret. She would have known what to do from the very first Sunday, I think. She always did. I've thought a lot about what this whole experience means, beyond the obvious, beyond the betrayal and the legal proceedings and the paperwork that ends a marriage. I've thought about what Maya's question actually was, what it represented in the broader accounting of things. She asked it because she didn't know she shouldn't. She asked it because she saw something that didn't match the world she understood, and her instinct was simply to ask why, the way children do before they learn that some questions are dangerous. We spend so much of our adult lives learning to not ask those questions, learning to accommodate the discomfort of not knowing, because knowing might cost too much. We see the unfamiliar car in the driveway, and we choose the easy explanation. We notice the distraction, the changed password, the phone that gets turned face down a little too quickly, and we file it away in a drawer we don't open. Children don't have that drawer yet. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes, The most important thing a family can have is someone who doesn't know to be quiet. Maya Hayes will be 9 years old in the spring. She doesn't fully understand what her question started. She knows that her parents aren't together anymore, and she knows that her mother is happier now than she was before. And she knows that every third Sunday she gets honey-glazed salmon and usually beats her grandfather at dominoes. That's enough for her. The present is enough. It's enough for me, too. Thank you for being here through every chapter of this story. If it touched something in you, if it made you think about the questions you've been afraid to ask, or the truth you've been waiting for the right moment to face, please share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Subscribe to this channel, leave your like, and let me know in the comments. Is there someone in your life with the kind of honesty that only children have? Tell me about them below. The truth doesn't have a schedule. It just waits for someone brave enough or innocent enough to say it out loud.